It all started on a cloudy morning when a quiet man stood outside a small adoption center on the edge of town. He had been there before, many times actually, but today felt different. He wasn't there to donate or volunteer. He had made a decision that most people would call impossible. He wanted to adopt not one child, not two, but 5 little girls who had been waiting for years to find a real home. The staff at the center knew him by face. He had visited often, bringing toys and clothes for the children. He never said much, but everyone could tell that he cared deeply. When he walked in that morning and asked to speak to the director, they assumed he had come to donate again. But when he quietly said he wanted to adopt all 5 girls, the room went silent. The director blinked in surprise, almost certain she had heard him wrong. "All 5?" she repeated. He nodded without hesitation. Yes, all of them. They shouldn't be separated. The 5 girls were sisters in spirit, if not by blood. They had met in foster care and grown inseparable over the years. They shared everything, books, dreams, and even fears. Each one had her own story of being moved from house to house, never knowing how long they would stay or where they would go next. The thought of them being split apart was unbearable to him. He had no children of his own. He wasn't married, and some might say his life was too quiet, too ordinary. But when he saw those girls playing together in the adoption center's small yard, something in him changed. He saw their laughter, their strength, and the way they held on to each other. He knew right then that they needed someone who would hold on to them the same way. The process wasn't easy. The adoption agency asked dozens of questions. They wanted to know if he was sure. They warned him about the challenges, the cost, and the responsibility. Most people would have backed down, but he didn't. He went through every interview, every background check, every home visit. He filled out the endless paperwork with patience. Still, people around him didn't understand. Some of his friends thought he had lost his mind. One of them asked, "Why would you do this to yourself? 5 kids and all at once?" He simply smiled and said, "Because they deserve a home." When the adoption was finally approved, he drove to the center to pick them up. The girls were waiting with their small bags packed. They looked nervous but hopeful. The youngest one clung to an old stuffed bear, holding it so tightly that her knuckles turned white. When he walked in, they looked at him with wide eyes. He knelt down and said softly, "Let's go home." That moment marked the beginning of a journey that would change all of their lives forever. But outside the walls of their new home, not everyone was happy for them. News about the adoption spread quickly in town. At first, it was just whispers. Neighbors talking over fences, people sharing opinions in coffee shops. Then it reached social media, and things took an uglier turn. Photos of him and the girls taken outside the adoption center began to circulate. People he didn't even know began leaving cruel comments. Some said he was doing it for attention. Others made jokes about how he would never understand what it meant to raise 5 black girls. The comments grew harsher, questioning his motives and mocking his choice. It didn't take long before his quiet life turned into something he never expected: public judgment. He tried to ignore it, but it hurt. The girls were old enough to notice the stares when they went out. Sometimes people would whisper when they walked past or give them strange looks in stores. The oldest girl once asked him, "Why do they look at us like that?" He didn't know how to answer, but he said, "People don't always understand what love looks like." Despite everything, he focused on building a home for them. The house was small, but he made sure each girl had her own space. He painted the walls in bright colors and put their drawings up in the hallway. He learned how to braid hair by watching videos online, and he often spent evenings helping with homework or reading bedtime stories. The early days were hard. 5 children meant 5 sets of emotions, 5 different needs, and 5 stories full of pain that needed healing. Some nights, one of the girls would wake up crying from bad dreams. Others would struggle to trust that this new home would last. They had been disappointed before. There were days when the man felt completely exhausted. He would sit on the couch late at night, surrounded by silence, wondering if he was doing the right thing. But then he would hear one of the girls laugh in the next room, or he'd see them helping each other with homework, and he'd know it was worth it. He began to learn things that only a parent could understand, the small victories that make the hard days bearable. The first time one of the girls called him Dad, he felt something shift inside him. It was quiet, almost whispered, but it was the sound of trust being built. Still, the world outside didn't stop judging. One day when he took the girls to a local park, A stranger walked up and asked him bluntly if they were all his. When he said yes, the person looked confused, almost skeptical. "That's unusual," they said. He just smiled and replied, "Love doesn't have to look the same for everyone." Over time, the girls began to flourish. The youngest, once shy and withdrawn, started to sing around the house. The middle child, who had always struggled in school, began to bring home better grades. The oldest took on the role of helper, making sure her sisters brushed their teeth and packed their lunches. But the man still carried the weight of others' opinions. Some nights he'd scroll through his phone and see the old comments still lingering online. People who didn't know his story had already decided who he was. But instead of arguing back, he focused on proving them wrong in the only way he knew how, by loving his daughters with everything he had. There were moments of doubt, of course. Bills piled up. The washing machine broke. Someone got sick and he had to miss work. It wasn't easy being both mother and father, provider and comforter. Yet even on the hardest days, the house was full of laughter. It was loud, messy, and full of life, exactly what he had dreamed of. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the girls' bedroom doors and listen to them whispering and giggling under the blankets. It reminded him why he had chosen this path in the first place. They weren't just 5 children he had adopted. They were his family, and he was theirs. As months passed, the community's curiosity turned into quiet respect. Teachers began noticing how polite and bright the girls were. Neighbors who once whispered started waving hello. Still, not everyone approved, but it didn't matter anymore. The bond inside that home was stronger than any outside noise. One rainy evening, while they all sat on the floor eating pizza and watching a movie, the youngest looked up and said, "Dad, I'm glad you found us." He smiled, eyes glistening, and replied, "No, sweetheart. You found me." That night he realized that no amount of criticism could undo what they had built together. Love had already done its work quietly and powerfully, inside the walls of a small home that once felt too empty. He didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know if people would ever stop talking. But one thing he knew for sure, he would never regret the choice he made that cloudy morning. Because sometimes the best decisions are the ones no one else understands until years later. Outside, the rain kept falling softly against the windows, and inside, 5 girls slept peacefully, knowing they finally belonged. The man stood for a moment in the hallway, watching the light flicker from the TV, feeling a warmth that words couldn't describe. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole. The world might not have seen it yet, but something remarkable was already happening in that little house. A quiet love story was being written, not with grand gestures or fame, but with patience, courage, and the kind of love that doesn't care what others think. And though many had criticized him, he was already proving them wrong. One bedtime story, one smile, one small miracle at a time. The first year of their new life together passed faster than anyone expected. The man had imagined that once the adoption was complete, things would somehow fall into place. But real life was far from a perfect picture. Every day brought new challenges, new lessons, and moments that tested both his patience and his love. The girls had finally started to feel safe, but the memories of their past didn't disappear overnight. Some mornings, the youngest would wake up crying, afraid that she'd be sent away again. The middle ones sometimes argued over small things, food, toys, even bedtime, because in foster care they had learned that nothing was guaranteed. They still struggled to believe this home was really theirs forever. The man understood that love couldn't be rushed. He gave them space when they needed it, and comfort when they asked for it. Every day before they left for school, he made them stand in a circle by the door and repeat the same words. "We are family. We belong together." At first they giggled when saying it, not quite taking it seriously. But slowly those words became a promise that held them close. School brought its own kind of challenges. The girls were now part of a world that often looked at them differently. Some kids asked questions in class. Why their dad didn't look like them, why they were all adopted together. The oldest tried to ignore it, but sometimes she came home quiet, her eyes tired. The man would sit beside her at the kitchen table, peeling apples for a snack, and say softly, "You don't have to explain your family to anyone. They'll understand one day." Despite the whispers, they began to grow stronger. The man made sure their home was filled with laughter. He organized movie nights, messy pancake breakfasts, and weekend walks by the lake. Even when money was tight, he found small ways to make them feel special. One day he surprised them with a small garden in the backyard. They planted flowers together, each girl choosing her own color. The youngest picked yellow because she said it looked like sunshine. By the time summer came, their garden was full of color, just like their lives. But outside their little world, not everyone was supportive. Some people still questioned his decision. Whenever they went to the grocery store or to church, he could feel the looks. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. It hurt him to know that people could see something beautiful and still choose to find fault in it. He decided not to waste his time trying to change their opinions. Instead, he poured his energy into the girls. He helped them with homework every night, even when he didn't fully understand it himself. He learned how to make school lunches they actually liked. He even joined the parent committee at school, something he had never imagined doing. The teachers, once unsure about him, began to notice how involved he was. Slowly, people's doubts started to fade. One evening, the oldest girl brought home a school project. She had to write about her hero. When she handed it in, the teacher called him the next day. Her voice trembled as she read part of the essay aloud. The girl had written, "My dad isn't a superhero, but he saved me. He gave me a family when I didn't think I would ever have one." He hung up the phone with tears in his eyes. It was the first time he truly realized how much he had changed their lives, and how much they had changed his. Still, life was far from perfect. There were moments of frustration. The bills never seemed to end. Groceries disappeared faster than he could buy them. He often stayed up late at night, fixing broken toys or sewing loose buttons on school uniforms. Sometimes he sat by the window staring into the dark, wondering if he was doing enough. There were also moments that tested his patience in ways he never expected. Once, one of the girls came home upset after a classmate made a cruel comment about their family. She locked herself in her room, refusing to talk to anyone. He stood outside her door for hours, not knowing what to say. Finally, he whispered, "You don't have to be like anyone else. Just be you. That's enough." Eventually, she opened the door and fell into his arms, crying. That night reminded him that love wasn't about fixing everything. It was about standing there when things fell apart. Over time, their bond became unbreakable. The girls began to trust that he wasn't going anywhere. They started to share their dreams, their fears, and even their little secrets. They would leave him notes on the fridge saying things like, "You make the best pancakes," or "Thank you for being our dad." He kept every note, tucking them inside a small wooden box he kept by his bed. As months turned into years, their home became a safe place, not just for them but for others too. Sometimes their friends from school would come over, curious about this unique family that everyone used to whisper about. They were always welcomed with open arms. The man made sure everyone who entered his home felt seen and accepted. One day, a neighbor who had once criticized him came by to drop off some mail that had been delivered to the wrong address. As she handed it over, she glanced inside and saw the girls sitting around the table doing homework while music played in the background. For a moment, she just stood there watching. "You've done something special here," she finally said. He smiled and replied, "I just gave them love. They did the rest." The girls continued to grow, each one finding her own path. The youngest developed a love for drawing and filled the house with colorful sketches. The quiet middle child became the storyteller of the family, writing poems about their life together. The oldest began helping younger students at school, determined to give others the same kindness she had received. One weekend, the man decided to take them all on a short trip out of town, a small getaway to the countryside. They packed sandwiches, snacks, and an old blanket. They spent the whole day running through fields, laughing, chasing butterflies, and taking pictures. When the sun began to set, they all sat together watching the sky turn orange and pink. "Do you ever miss your old life?" one of the girls asked him quietly. He thought for a moment and said, "No, this is the life I was waiting for." That simple trip became one of their favorite memories. The photos they took that day ended up being framed on their living room wall, a reminder of how far they had come. Yet, despite their happiness, the man knew that the world outside their home could still be cruel. He taught the girls to stand proud, to never let anyone define them by their skin color or their past. He told them, "What matters most is how big your heart is, not what others see on the outside." As the years passed, the noise from critics grew quieter. The same people who once questioned him were now the ones asking for advice. Some even came forward to apologize. But he never held grudges. He simply smiled and said, "We all learn eventually." One quiet night, long after the girls had gone to bed, he sat by the window again, the same way he had in those early days. The house that once felt too big was now filled with laughter, noise, and life. He could hear the soft sound of one of the girls humming in her sleep. He looked around and thought about how much everything had changed. There was still a long road ahead. School events, growing pains, and the many challenges of parenting 5 daughters. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had learned something powerful. Love doesn't always start easy, but it grows stronger with every test it survives. The man knew that one day people would see the full picture. They would understand why he had chosen this path, why he had ignored the voices that told him it was impossible. But for now, he didn't need anyone's approval. The laughter echoing through his home was proof enough that he had done the right thing. Outside, the night was calm. The moonlight spilled gently through the window, shining on the framed photo of their first day together, the day he told 5 frightened little girls, "Let's go home." Now, years later, he finally understood that it wasn't just them who needed saving. In many ways, they had saved him too, and though the world didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. A story that had once started with judgment and doubt was slowly turning into one of love, strength, and quiet victory, the kind of story that would one day silence everyone who ever said he couldn't do it. Years passed quietly, and the little house that once echoed with uncertainty was now filled with the sounds of laughter, footsteps, and the endless chatter of 5 growing girls. Each one had started to find her own place in the world. Their home had its share of noise and chaos, but to him, it was the sound of life, something he had longed for all those years he lived alone. Morning routines were never easy. He would wake up before sunrise to make breakfast, often juggling frying pans and cereal boxes while trying to wake the girls. The kitchen always looked like a storm had passed through it before school time, but somehow everyone left on time. He didn't mind the mess. He called it the happy chaos of family life. The oldest girl had now reached her teenage years, and with that came new challenges. She was smart and independent, but sometimes struggled with how the world saw her. At school, she faced comments and questions that made her feel out of place. People still whispered about their family, though not as loudly as before. She pretended it didn't bother her, but he could always tell when something was wrong. One evening after dinner, he found her sitting quietly on the porch. She was staring at the stars, lost in thought. He sat beside her without saying anything for a while. Then she said softly, "I don't look like you, and people don't let me forget that." He turned to her and said, "You don't have to look like someone to belong to them. Family isn't about matching faces, it's about matching hearts." She leaned on his shoulder, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence said everything. The other girls were growing fast too. The middle ones had started developing their own personalities, one full of energy and always laughing, the other quiet and thoughtful, often writing in her little notebook. The youngest 2 were inseparable, always running around the house, filling every corner with joy. Still, raising 5 daughters alone wasn't easy. There were times when the man felt completely drained. Between school meetings, bills, house chores, and work, he hardly had a moment for himself. Sometimes he stayed up late, repairing a broken toy or sewing a ripped backpack strap, just to make sure the girls had what they needed. He rarely complained, though. Every smile, every hug made the exhaustion worth it. The community around them had begun to change. People who once criticized him were now seeing the difference his love had made. Teachers spoke highly of the girls. Neighbors stopped to chat or offer help. But even as acceptance grew, some still couldn't understand. When strangers saw him with the girls in public, he could still feel the stares. But now, instead of feeling hurt, he felt proud. Proud of the life he had built. Proud of the family they had become. There was one day, though, that would stay with him forever. It was the girls' school cultural event where parents were invited to watch their children perform. Each of the girls had worked hard preparing dances and songs. When he walked into the school auditorium, a few people turned their heads, whispering quietly. But then the music started and the girls took the stage. They danced together, moving perfectly in sync, their faces full of joy. They didn't just perform. They told their story through every step. When the performance ended, the whole room erupted in applause. Some of the same people who once judged him stood and clapped the loudest. The pride he felt at that moment couldn't be described in words. Afterward, as they walked to the car, one of the girls said, "Dad, did you see them clapping? Even the ones who used to talk about us." He smiled and replied, "Yes, I saw. Sometimes love doesn't have to argue. It just shows itself." Life continued with its ups and downs. The teenage years brought new lessons for everyone. The girls started forming their own opinions, making their own choices. The man had to learn to give them space while still guiding them. There were arguments, slammed doors, and even tears. But no matter how tough things got, they always came back together. He often reminded them, "We are not perfect, but we're real. And real love is messy sometimes." One evening, while helping the girls with a school project, they started talking about the past. The youngest asked, "Do you remember the day you adopted us?" The others laughed, remembering the old photos on the wall. The man smiled and said, "I remember every moment. That was the day I stopped being alone." The room went quiet for a second before the middle one whispered, "It was the day we stopped being lost." Moments like that reminded him why he had chosen this path. The world could say what it wanted, but nothing could take away what they had built together. Still, even with love and progress, there were hard times. One of the girls fell ill one winter and he spent nights at the hospital, barely sleeping, praying she'd recover. The others helped take care of her when she came home, showing just how much they had grown as a family. Those tough days made them even closer. There were times when he questioned whether he had done enough. Sometimes when the bills piled up or work became stressful, he felt overwhelmed. But every time he thought about giving up, something small would happen. A hug from one of the girls, a note left on the fridge, a simple "Thank you, Dad." Those were the moments that gave him strength to keep going. As the years went by, each of the girls began to find her own voice. One joined the school choir. Another started drawing portraits that amazed her teachers. The oldest began mentoring younger students, helping them deal with challenges she once faced. They were growing not just in age, but in kindness, confidence, and hope. People around town began to notice. One local paper even wrote a small article about their story. It talked about how love could change lives, how a single person's decision could give hope to many. The man didn't like attention, but he was proud that his daughter's happiness was inspiring others. One day, while walking through the grocery store, an older woman stopped him. She said, "I remember when people used to talk about you. Now they talk about how wonderful those girls are. You proved everyone wrong." He smiled kindly and said, "I didn't need to prove them wrong. I just needed to prove to the girls that they were loved." At home, their bond continued to deepen. They had traditions now: Friday night movies, Sunday morning pancakes, and their garden, which had grown beautifully over the years. The flowers they planted when they first came home still bloomed every season, stronger each year, just like them. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would all sit outside, watching the sunset together. The man would look at them, 5 young women now full of life and dreams, and feel a warmth in his chest that no words could describe. They had become his world. One night, as they were cleaning up after dinner, the oldest daughter turned to him and said, "Do you know what people call us now? They say we're the family that proved love can win." He laughed softly and said, "Love always wins, it just takes time for the world to notice." That night, after everyone went to bed, he stood in the hallway, looking at the photos on the wall, pictures from birthdays, holidays, and everyday moments. Each one told a story of struggle, growth, and love. He realized that the criticism, the judgment, the sleepless nights, all of it had been worth it. He thought about the day he had first walked into that adoption center, how uncertain he'd felt, and how everyone had doubted him. If only they could see them now. He didn't need to say a word to prove himself. His life, his home, and the smiles of his daughters said everything for him. Outside, the night air was cool and peaceful. The lights in the girls' rooms were slowly turning off one by one. He whispered to himself, "We made it." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by love, he knew he had done something truly special. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more lessons to learn. But he had already won the hardest battle, the one against doubt. He had shown that family isn't built by appearances or expectations, but by love, trust, and courage. And while the world had once criticized him, they were now watching in silence. realizing that this man, who had once been doubted, had built something extraordinary. The years went by faster than he ever expected. The once small girls who had come into his life holding each other's hands in fear were now growing into young women full of confidence and dreams. The house that once echoed with bedtime stories and spilled cereal was now filled with the sound of music, laughter, and sometimes the gentle arguments that come with growing up. Each of the girls had found her own path. The oldest had just started college and wanted to study social work. She said she wanted to help kids who grew up like she did, those who felt lost and unseen. The man couldn't have been prouder. He remembered the day she had first come home from school crying because someone had said mean things about their family. Now she stood tall, strong, and full of purpose. The second oldest had discovered a passion for music. She played the guitar and sang at small school events, sometimes filling the house with songs that made everyone stop what they were doing just to listen. The quiet middle one loved to write. Her notebooks were filled with poems about home, love, and family, words that made even her father's eyes water when he read them secretly at night. The youngest two were still in school, full of energy and curiosity, always ready to share a new story from their day. Life had become a rhythm, busy, loud, and beautiful. The man often joked that he never got a quiet moment, but deep down he loved every second of it. Still, raising 5 daughters wasn't without challenges. There were college fees to worry about, bills that always seemed to appear out of nowhere, and the usual ups and downs that come with life. But every time he began to worry, something small reminded him why it was all worth it. A thank you hug, a shared laugh, or the sound of their voices echoing through the house. People in the community had completely changed their tune. The same ones who had whispered behind his back years ago now smiled and greeted him warmly whenever they saw him. Some even stopped to tell him how much they admired what he had done. He didn't like being called a hero, though. He would always say the same thing. "I'm just a dad doing what dads are supposed to do." But deep down, he knew what they meant. He had taken on something most people would have been too afraid to try, and he had done it with love and patience. One day, the local community center invited him and the girls to an event about adoption and family. They wanted him to share his story. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't someone who liked standing in front of crowds, but the girls convinced him to do it. They said, "Dad, people need to hear this," so he agreed. On the day of the event, he stood nervously on stage as the audience quieted down. The 5 girls sat in the front row, smiling proudly. He took a deep breath and began to speak, not from notes or papers, but from his heart. He told them about the first day he saw the girls, how scared they had been, and how he had promised himself never to let them be separated. He spoke about the criticism, the stares, and the hurtful words, but also about the laughter, the love, and the way his life had changed because of them. The room was silent as he spoke. At one point, his voice broke a little, but he kept going. When he finished, the audience stood up and clapped. Some people even had tears in their eyes. He looked down at his daughters, and they were clapping the loudest, their eyes shining with pride. That night, when they got home, the girls surrounded him with hugs. The oldest said, "Dad, now everyone knows what we already knew, that love doesn't have limits." A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Someone had recorded his speech at the event and posted it online. The video quickly spread, reaching thousands of people. Comments poured in from around the world. People thanking him for sharing his story. Others saying they were inspired to consider adoption themselves. He couldn't believe it. For years he had been judged and criticized. Now those same people were calling his story beautiful. The girls teased him, saying, "Dad, you're famous now," but he just laughed. "Fame doesn't matter," he said. "If even one child finds a home because of our story, then it's worth it." Life went on, but things were different now. They were invited to more events, interviews, and even a local TV show. Though he was still shy about speaking in public, he went along because it gave him a chance to remind others that love can break any barrier. But fame wasn't what made him happiest. What truly filled his heart was watching the girls grow into kind and strong young women. Each milestone felt like a quiet victory. Every graduation, every birthday, every family dinner where everyone sat together and laughed. He still remembered the days when people had said he was making a mistake, that he'd regret his choice. But now, when he looked at the young women sitting around his dinner table, he knew he had never been more right about anything in his life. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, the quiet middle daughter handed him a folded piece of paper. I wrote something for you, she said shyly. He opened it and found a short poem. You saw us when no one did. You held us when we were afraid. You loved us when it wasn't easy. You gave us a home and a name. He couldn't hold back his tears. He hugged her tightly, whispering, "Thank you. You'll never know how much that means to me." Over time, each girl found her own way of giving back. The oldest volunteered at youth centers. The second started performing at charity events, donating her earnings to foster programs. Even the younger ones helped organize donation drives at school. Their home became known as a place of kindness where everyone was welcome. One weekend, the girls surprised him with something special. They had created a short video using old photos and clips of their life together, from the day they first met him to their recent celebrations. The video was titled, "Because He Chose Us." They played it for him on the TV, and as he watched, memories flooded back. The laughter, the tears, the small moments no one else had seen. It was all there. When the video ended, they all sat quietly for a moment before one of the girls said softly, "We just wanted you to know how much we love you." He smiled through tears and said, "You don't have to tell me. I already know. I feel it every day." The video didn't stay private for long. The girls shared it online, and once again their story touched thousands of people. Messages came from everywhere. Parents, teachers, and even strangers who said their story reminded them that there was still good in the world. Years of criticism had turned into years of admiration. The world that once judged him was now celebrating him. But for him, the true reward wasn't the attention. It was the laughter echoing through his home, the hugs, and the quiet nights when everyone was safe under one roof. Sometimes he would still think about the early days, the fear, the loneliness, the uncertainty. He remembered how people doubted him, how some said he couldn't handle it. But he had handled it. Not perfectly, not easily, but with love. And that love had changed everything. One late night, he sat alone in the living room, looking at the framed photos on the wall. The garden outside was blooming again, just as it had every year. He thought about how each flower started as a seed, small and fragile, but with care and time it grew strong. His daughters were just like that, each one a part of something beautiful that had taken years to blossom. He leaned back in his chair, a soft smile on his face, and whispered to himself, "We did it." He didn't need to prove anything anymore. The critics were gone, the noise had faded, and what remained was something pure, a family built not by blood, but by choice. And though the world had finally seen what he had always known, the real victory was quiet, resting in the hearts of 5 daughters who once had no one, and a man who chose to love them anyway. Years later, the house that once overflowed with noise had grown quieter. The laughter that used to echo from room to room now visited only on weekends and holidays. The 5 girls had all grown up, building lives of their own, yet every corner of that home still held their memories. Drawings on the fridge, scuff marks on the hallway walls, and photos lining the shelves that told the story of their journey together. The man, now older, often sat by the window in the evenings, watching the sunset spill across the sky. He liked to think about how fast time had passed. It seemed only yesterday he was chasing little girls around the yard, teaching them how to ride bikes and packing school lunches before the morning rush. Now those little girls were women, strong, independent, and full of life. The oldest had finished college and worked as a counselor for children in foster care. She said she wanted to be for them what he had been for her, someone who believed in her when no one else did. The second daughter traveled often, singing at events and using her music to raise awareness for children in need. The third one became a writer, her stories inspired by their life. The youngest 2 were still in university, one studying nursing and the other dreaming of opening her own art studio. He felt proud, but he also missed them deeply. The silence in the house sometimes felt heavy, especially at night. Still, every Sunday without fail they called him, sometimes all together, sometimes one by one. And whenever they came home for visits, the house came alive again, filled with laughter, music, and the smell of home-cooked meals. One cold winter afternoon, he was sitting by the fireplace when the oldest called. She said she wanted to come by with some news but wanted everyone there. Within a few days, the family gathered again. They brought food, gifts, and stories about their busy lives. The youngest 2 joked around, arguing about who made the better pasta. The middle one was showing her father a new story she had written. He listened to them all with a smile that never faded. Then, when everyone had settled, the oldest stood up and said softly, "Dad, I have something to tell you." Her eyes sparkled as she continued, "I'm getting married." For a moment, he just stared at her. His heart swelled with emotion and tears filled his eyes. He got up and hugged her tightly. "You deserve all the happiness in the world," he whispered. The girls cheered, hugged each other, and started talking all at once, asking about the wedding, the dress, the date. The house was once again full of excitement. In the following months, preparations began. The man found himself involved in every part of it, from helping pick flowers to choosing the song for the father-daughter dance. The girls teased him, saying he was more excited than the bride. Maybe he was. To him, it wasn't just a wedding. It was a moment that showed how far they had come. On the wedding day, the air was filled with laughter and joy. The man stood in the corner watching as his daughter walked down the aisle, looking radiant and confident. For a moment, his mind drifted back to the day he had first met her, a scared little girl holding her sister's hands tightly, unsure of what the future held. And now here she was, walking toward a new life, surrounded by love. When it came time for the father-daughter dance, he held her hand and whispered, "You'll always be my little girl." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and replied, "And you'll always be my dad." That night, as the music played and the family celebrated, he realized that everything he had gone through, the criticism, the struggle, the sleepless nights, had led to this moment. A family that was once broken had become whole. After the wedding, he noticed something else changing in his daughters. They were no longer the ones being taken care of. Now they wanted to take care of him. They called more often, made sure he had everything he needed, and invited him to stay with them whenever he wanted. But he loved his home, the one where it all began. It wasn't big or fancy, but it held a lifetime of memories. The backyard still had the swing he built when the girls were small, and the kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon from all the cakes they used to bake together. Sometimes neighbors stopped by to talk. Many of them had known him since the early days, and they often said things like, "You did something amazing." But he always shook his head and said, "They're the amazing ones." One summer, he was invited to speak at a national adoption conference. His daughters convinced him to go, promising they'd join him on stage. The event was held in a large hall filled with families, social workers, and people interested in adoption. As he stood on the stage, he felt the same nervousness he had years ago when he first shared their story. But when he looked to his left and saw all 5 daughters standing proudly beside him, his nerves faded. He began to speak, his voice calm but filled with emotion. He talked about the challenges, the long nights, the judgment from others, the fear of not being enough. But then he spoke about the laughter, the love, and the transformation that had taken place in their lives. The audience listened in silence, many with tears in their eyes. When he finished, the crowd rose to their feet, applauding not just him, but the girl standing beside him. It was one of the proudest moments of his life. After the conference, they received hundreds of messages from people who said the story gave them hope. Some couples said they were now thinking about adoption because of them. The daughters hugged their father and said, "See, you've changed lives again." He smiled and said softly, "We changed lives. Together." As the years went by, the family continued to grow. There were graduations, birthdays, and eventually grandchildren. Each new milestone brought them closer, and whenever the family gathered, they always made time to sit together and talk about how it all began. One evening, while sitting outside with the girls and their kids running around, the second daughter turned.